Virginia Beach is a popular beach destination drawing about 7 million tourists each year, but there are some areas of the beach that few tourists go see. Today, we are going to show you oceanfront areas that, unlike the popular boardwalk area, have been left untouched by development. We will share with you the closest thing to natural coastline as God intended it in Virginia Beach. Our tour today will take us to Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge and then on a tram ride to neighboring False Cape State Park, which had some amazing things to see and experience. We entered Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge and paid the $5 per car entrance fee. You can get in free if you have the America the Beautiful National Parks Pass. Our first stop was the Visitor Center to get our bearings and pick up a map. They had several interesting exhibits about the shoreline and the animals who make their home there. There's also an interesting exhibit listing what activities humans can enjoy here, including hiking, photography, beachcombing, birding, non-motorized boating, fishing if you have a license, and on a very limited basis, even hunting to keep the deer population in balance. The land we will be touring today is an extension into Virginia of the peninsula that makes up the north end of the Outer Banks. So just as in the Outer Banks, there's an ocean side to the east, and the other side of the peninsula faces the bay. We started with a tour of the ocean side of the refuge. There were only 2 other people within sight on this beach. Swimming, surfing, and sunbathing are not allowed here. This is because it's a wildlife preserve, and recreation is not the area's primary purpose. You can fish here with a Virginia saltwater fishing license. Fish, after all, are not the animals that the refuge was set up to protect. More on that in a moment. You can also hike along the beach, take pictures, or collect seashells. Seashells are in fact the only thing that you're allowed to take home with you from the land. No other artifact, including plants, animals, or historical items, can be removed from the refuge. By the way, if you enjoy this video, please register your positive feelings with YouTube by clicking that like button.
We also checked out the other side of the land to see the bay. You can fish in the bay with the Virginia freshwater fishing license. There's also a launch in this area for kayaks, canoes, and small non-motorized boats that can be carried by hand. There are about 7 miles of trails at this refuge that can be hiked and in some cases biked. We enjoyed checking out the Seaside Trail to the beach and the Sunset Overlook Loop for views of the bay. Both of these trails are only about a quarter mile long, but we didn't have time to enjoy any of the other trails as we had an appointment to board a tram for a 4-hour tour through the refuge and then through False Cape State Park. At the time we took the tram tour, which only operates certain days of the week, the days vary by season, tickets to ride the tram were only $8 per person, and you did need to make advance reservations by calling False Cape State Park. The tram driver was a park ranger who narrated throughout the experience, sharing information about the wildlife, the land management, and the history of both the refuge and the neighboring state park. We drove through the refuge along the bay. This refuge was created by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to provide a sanctuary for the thousands of migrating birds, such as tundra swans and Canada geese, that winter here in the area. Of course, in the summer, you won't see any of the winter birds. We did see some birds from our tram, though, such as these, which were some sort of egret. Forgive us for not remembering all the exact species names. We also saw some sort of plovers foraging for food.
You'll find that type of feeding behavior with a lot of our shorebirds. They're reaching down into the mud, so they're eating invertebrates, small little animals under the surface of the mud there.
We passed this observation building that is used in the winter when all the birds migrate to the area. Visitors can watch the birds up close in this building behind glass and through observation spots in the wall. We did see a lot of turtles. One stopped our progression on the tram ride while it walked slowly across the road. We did get a pretty good look at it from the tram once it got to the other side, though. There were about a dozen turtles in the water together here. Most of them you could only see their heads bobbing up and down. We also saw a couple different raccoons during the tour, but they were so fast that by the time we got our cameras up and in position, they were already on the run through tall grasses. The driver told us how the park uses pumps to lower and raise the amount of water in the pools that are used by the wintering waterfowl based on their needs. The refuge has wildlife of various kinds throughout the year, but it is most easily seen in the winter when birds are present in great numbers. But we still enjoyed our tram ride in the summer.
Then we entered False Cape State Park. This park is one of the least visited state parks in Virginia. That is because you cannot bring your vehicle to this park. You can only enter on foot or on bike through Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, or you could get there by boat. You can, of course, also take the tram into the park as we did, but if you ride the tram in, you're expected to ride it out again a couple hours later, which doesn't leave a ton of time for sightseeing in this over 4,000-acre park. The park got its name because the landmass looks similar to Cape Henry, which sits at the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. Ships would be steered into False Cape by confused crews, sometimes causing shipwrecks in the shallow waters of the area. Shortly into the park, the tram stops for about 20 minutes at the park's visitor center. In addition to the much-needed opportunity to visit the bathrooms 90 or so minutes into the tram ride, there are also exhibits here about the wildlife, land, and history of the park. There's also a gift shop where you can get souvenirs and snacks, including ice cream treats and cold drinks. Outside the building, they have a replica of the Key West buoy, marking the southernmost point in the continental U.S. This replica marks the park as the southernmost state park in Virginia. From here, it is only 1,146 miles to Key West, Florida. Next to the park's buoy is a whale's hip bone. We didn't know whales had hip bones, but a park ranger assured us they do. Then it was time to get back on the tram and head off to our next stop. We drove for a bit through a maritime forest while the driver pointed out interesting information about the area. After a bit of a drive through the woods, we got off the tram to begin a 1-mile round-trip hike to an interesting area. The hike is not too difficult, but if you are unable to hike, you can also stay on the tram, or just stay back at the False Cape Visitor Center. Along the way, the ranger stopped to discuss points of interest, such as this Yopon holly tree. This is the only plant naturally occurring in the United States that contains caffeine. It was used to make tea by Native Americans and settlers alike, and was served in restaurants on Ocracoke Island in the Outer Banks until sometime in the 1970s.
After hiking for half a mile, we ended up at the historic Wash Woods community. A town was built back here in the woods when survivors of a shipwreck in this area just decided to build a new life for themselves here at some point in the 1800s. They also drew citizens to the town among people who were looking to evade the authorities elsewhere. This town was a bit of a distance from other communities and had a reputation for being lawless at times in its history. But the town disbanded in the 1930s, and there isn't much left that would let you know there was ever a town back here. But there are a couple artifacts left behind. One is the steeple of the Washwoods Methodist Church. Most of this wooden church building was taken apart for building projects or to build fires over the decades since it was abandoned. So the park had a structure built to protect all that remains of the church, which is the steeple. The steeple and the once existing church were made from cypress wood that washed ashore from a ship that wrecked in the area in 1895. You can also see parts of the stone foundation of the church building in the ground still. Nearby the church site is the other artifact from Washwoods, the Washwood Cemetery. There are about a dozen or so graves back here. They have shells laid on each grave, in a similar tradition to what we see at many cemeteries, where visitors would leave flowers or coins behind to pay respects. A number of descendants of those who were buried here are still living in the Virginia Beach area and occasionally make the journey out to the grave sites to remember their family's past generations. After a half-mile hike back to the tram, we're taken to an overlook of the bay and look across at Knott's Island, North Carolina. A number of former Washwoods residents moved across the water to Knott's Island when the Washwoods community ceased to exist. The ranger also pointed out a couple smaller, uninhabited islands in the bay.
The tram ride is a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure experience. If you don't want to do the hike to Washwoods, you can use that time to explore the park on your own. There was more we wanted to see, so we went back to do the whole tram experience again a few days later. So let's rewind back to the False Cape Visitor Center and start this part of the journey over again. So on the second tram tour we took, after the bathroom break and stop at the visitor center, we notified the ranger leading the tour that we wanted to go check out the beach. He showed us where to go on a map and told us to be back in 90 minutes. And he was nice enough to warn us that they had just got a report of a live snake along the trail that we would be walking. The snake was still there when we walked by. Jack took this picture with a zoom function from across the trail. As we walked, we got to some of the park's campsites. The park has primitive campsites on both the beach and the bay side of the park. These are on the beach side. Jack thinks it would be cool to camp here, but having to hike or bike in with camping equipment on our backs is a bit intimidating to me. Depending on which site you reserve, the distance from the only parking lot that you're allowed to use at a nearby city park is between a 6 and 8 mile journey. Maybe one day. Each site has a picnic table. There's drinking water available in the area, as well as an outdoor shower to get sand off, and a couple pit toilets for campers to use. Camping here is $25 a night for non-Virginia residents and $20 if you live in Virginia.
What makes me think this would be a fun adventure, though, is that if you rent one of these campsites, you are allowed to go camp on the beach. You're given a campsite in the woods, but you could also take your tent out on the sand between the dunes and the ocean. Camping with the sound of waves 50 feet away all night sounds fun. You can also fish in the area, and unlike the Back Bay Wildlife Refuge, you can sunbathe and jump in the water yourself and have a swim. Another family from the tram ride also made the hike out to the beach and enjoyed the water while we were there doing the same. The hike to the beach is about 0.8 miles from the visitor center along a flat trail that eventually turns into beach sand. and this beach was empty. Other than us and the other family from the tram, no one was there. The tents out on the sand were empty, as the people who were camping on the beach were hiking through the trails of the park at the time. This was a huge, empty, natural beach with just 5 of us and a bunch of tiny Atlantic ghost crabs enjoying the sand and surf.
After enjoying the beach a while, we hiked back to the visitor center. We learned some interesting information from the ranger at the center. This visitor center was built to withstand hurricanes. When a hurricane is expected to hit the area, guests are kicked out of the park. But the gates at the North Carolina border are opened, so the people who live in the northern Outer Banks can escape north into Virginia and then head west to avoid the storm, rather than driving south, which would add even more traffic to the bridge that the residents of the southern parts of the Outer Banks have to use to get off the barrier islands onto the mainland. This was a pretty great experience. We loved visiting Ocracoke Island earlier in the summer because of how uncrowded the beach was and how undeveloped most of the island around it was, but this area takes that to a whole other level. This park features about 6 miles of primitive, remote, unspoiled beaches. It was absolutely beautiful. We definitely recommend the tram tour if you're in the area. Sunscreen, water, and bug spray is necessary in the summer. If you are hardy enough to try camping on the beach, let us know what that experience is like. We would love to go see this area when the migratory birds are there in the winter. We'll have to see if we can work that out. If you visit in the winter and want to hike through Back Bay Wildlife Refuge into Falls Cape State Park, you should know that the hiking trails you would use to do so are actually closed in the winter, so you would have to hike several miles along the beach in the sand or use a boat to get to Falls Cape. If what you love about the beach is boardwalks, seafood restaurants, and fair rides, then you probably would not love this place. But if you want to see nature at its unspoiled best, then we highly recommend it. Click on the links at the end of this video to see First Landing State Park. This is Virginia's most visited state park, also in Virginia Beach. Or if you enjoyed learning the history of the Washwoods community, click on the Historical Sites playlist to learn some more interesting history with us. I'm Alice.
And I'm Jack.
Be sure to click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so we can see you the next time we're traveling through.